Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the last module of the CompTIA A Plus course, being module 18. Now, if you guys have been watching the previous 17 modules of this course, well done. Slow clap to you because that is a lot of work. If it's your first time just joining in right now, well, then maybe you should go and watch the previous 17 modules first, unless you're looking for something specific in this specific module. In that case, well, feel free to hang around. Alright guys, and then as for the main topics in this last module for the last time, here they are at the top right hand side for the last time. As you guys can see, our first one up is environmental impacts and controls. Second up, we're going to have create and maintain documentation, followed by use basic change management best practices, implement disaster prevention and recovery methods, and then lastly guys, professionalism and communication. So there you have it. That is the last main topics for this course. It's not the only topics. Obviously, there's going to be lots of sub categories within those main topics. You're only going to know once you actually jump into the video, right? If you guys have enjoyed this course, remember to give the video a like. If you would like to know when I release the last video for this course, which is just a dedicated exam tips video, or if you'd like to know when I release CompTIA N Plus or anything else for that matter, remember to hit the subscribe button down below, notification bell. Otherwise, you're not going to know when I release those episodes. And guys, if you feel like supporting my channel, maybe my creativity, anything like that, you're welcome to go and donate anything in that matter. You can find that in the video description down below. All of that details in the description down below for you guys. All right, guys, like usual, and for the last time, let's go to get our first topic. All right, guys, the first topic we're going to be looking at today is power issues. Now, regarding these power issues, something I would like to point out to you guys is these issues we're going to be talking about are caused by building power failures. We're not talking about the computer itself. We're not talking about the power supply in the computer itself. In no way are we talking about the computer. So these power issues are things that's generally without of your reach. It's things you have no control over. It's when the power goes too high, goes too low, is completely gone, spikes, surges, those kinds of things. Now, what is the first one on my list with regards to power issues? The first one on my list is surge, an abrupt but brief change in the value of the voltage. So you'll find in some countries the voltage is about approximately 110 volts. That's the normal range. And in some other countries, the range is about approximately 220 volts. That's the normal range. So whatever your normal range might be, if it goes up ever so slightly and ever so briefly, that is generally seen as a surge. So for the most part, you'll find your devices are going to work just fine, but from time to time, there are going to be occasions when your devices will not be fine. It might actually damage your devices, especially electronics like desktops, laptops, TVs, any form of electronics. They are generally a lot more sensitive to things like surges than your general things like your washing machine, your kettle, your iron, that kinds of things. So anything that's in electronics, those do not like surges. The second one on my list for today is a spike. This is something you can encounter generally when the lightning hits your house or the lightning hits the power lines near your house or your building. So that's going to be a huge spike in voltage, and for the most part, most devices that's plugged in at that point in time will be fried, unless you've got something like a lightning protector plugged in. So that's something between your device and the wall socket that's plugged in. It's going to basically absorb that lightning, or it's going to be a fuse inside that device that's going to blow for the most part. If it sees the voltage going above a certain value, it's going to blow that fuse and it's going to protect your device from getting damaged. So that's a spike. Third one on the list is sag. So the power supply, instead of going too high with a surge or a spike, it's going to be too low. So if your voltage is supposed to be 110, it might go to 100, 90. So these numbers are not set in stone. I'm just sucking them out of my thumb as I'm going along. If it's supposed to be 220, it might go down to 200 for all we know. So for the most part, generally devices will still work. Some won't work at all. Some of them will work, but it will behave weirdly. You might find your computer is going to sound weird. If there's a light bulb on in your house, it might look very dim, almost like it's hooked up to a battery and the battery is about to die. That kind of situation. So I suppose one might say sag is the exact opposite of a surge. Surge is when it's briefly above the value it's supposed to be. Sag is when it's briefly below the value it's supposed to be. So they're basically the opposites of one another. The fourth one on my list is a brownout. So that's also when the voltage is too low, but it's generally when it's way too low and for longer periods of time. It's not something you'll find often. This is very rare. Quite frankly, a blackout is way more common than a brownout. So if it's a brownout, that is normally a very serious problem. It's probably not your building, but somewhere along the line there's a very serious problem, and this is catastrophic for most devices. Most devices won't start at all, and this could potentially damage the devices if they do actually start up. The last one on our list for power issues is something I accidentally just mentioned, which is a blackout. Most countries will never experience this, and hopefully you never have to experience this. But there are countries where this is actually a normal thing, where they have what we call rolling blackouts. So that's when the power is completely gone for the most part, just completely gone. It could be for an unspecified amount of time. It could be for an actual specified amount of time. The point here is there's absolutely no power in the building or your general area. That is a complete loss of power. So that just sucks. But quite frankly, I would prefer a blackout because at least then my stuff can't get broken. It's not going to blow them. It's just going to be no power. No power means it can get broken, obviously. Now, the second main item here on our list is power protection controls. So basically, in a nutshell, how can I go about protecting my devices against some of those issues we've just mentioned? So regarding power protection controls, I just want to once again point out something to you guys. Devices require stable power. So that is why we've got things like UPS devices. That's not the only thing you can go and use to mitigate these issues, but I'd make sure your power is clean. So when I use the word clean, that's not my word, it's an actual terminology we use. That means your power will be stable, consistent. So if it's supposed to be 110, it will stay on exactly 110. It's not going to go up or down or spike or whatever the case might be. So it needs to be a stable power supply. Electrical events can also crash devices or blow them or burn them out for the most part. And use power protection devices to mitigate these issues. Now, these power protection devices are the ones we're going to mention right now. The first one is a surge protector. That is something you can go and use against your normal brief power surges. So the power surge, if the power goes up too high, it might trip the device, or in some cases it might blow a fuse in that device. These surge protectors comes in many shapes and sizes. It might look like a multi-plug, and you just plug in all your devices into that little multi-plug. It almost looks like a plug extender. You plug it into the wall, that gives you 3 or 4 extra wall sockets. And inside of that device, there might be a fuse. If the voltage goes too high, the fuse blows, which means it breaks the circuit. So it also works to a certain extent against lightning, but they're not very effective against lightning. So I would say these are just only for your normal brief power surges. The second one we can go and make use of is a line conditioner. Now, these are not something you're going to find very often. Quite frankly, these are normally built into other devices like UPSs, uninterruptible power supplies, what we call it. But nonetheless, what is a line conditioner? It's a device that adjusts voltages in under voltage and over voltage conditions. So if voltage is too high, it brings it back down to the approximate amount. So if it needs to be 120, it's going to bring it back down to 120. If it's too low, it'll jack it up to 120 where it needs to be. That is the purpose of line conditioner, but it's the only thing it does. So this is normally built into other devices, like I said, like a UPS, where it gets compensated with other things and other benefits, like a battery. So we're moving on to our third item on the list, which actually is a PDU, a device designed to provide power to other devices that require it. So you can basically think of this as a battery. That's actually all it is. It's a fancy, fancy name for a fancy, fancy battery. If you were to go and take a line conditioner and a PDU, and you were to go and marry the two, or basically match them up or mash them together, that's going to give you what we have called a UPS, a battery power device, kind of like a PDU, designed to provide alternative AC power supply during a power failure. It's not the only thing it does though. So yes, it's going to provide your device with backup battery power, but at the same time Most UPS devices actually bring the voltage back down or boost it up if it's too high or if it's too low. So one might say it's also a line conditioner and a PDU all in one. How about that, eh? Next up, we've got environmental impacts. So these are things about the environment that's going to affect some sort of electronics. This could be your computer, could be a server, it could be a printer. Something about the environment is not so good for that specific electronic device. So this is going to affect your operation. It's going to make it slow in most cases, or it's just going to make it not work at all. And it's going to also, in some cases, affect the lifespan. So where it might have lasted you 5 years, this device, it might only last you 1 year, 2 years, So it's going to generally shorten the lifespan. So what we want to try and do is we want to try and keep these devices away from these environmental factors, or do something about it if we sometimes need to go and do something about it. This includes, but is not limited to, things like extreme temperatures. So if this device is in an environment that's very hot, so let's say this is a server, in a server room that does not have proper cooling or any cooling for that matter. So that's going to make it very hot, which means it's going to be very slow or, well, non-responsive. It might even burn out in some cases. If it's too cold, that can also actually influence some devices. You also have dampness and dust. Believe it or not, if an environment is too humid or not humid enough, even that can pose a problem, especially in server room environments, but also affects computers like laptops and desktops and other devices. So dampness and dust could also be a potential issue. Regularly inspect and clean surroundings. So this is more for environments where it's very dusty, that kind of thing. So if there's not proper airflow, make sure that you've cleaned all the dust, especially out of air vents and anything that could possibly get clogged in a dusty environment. So speaking about dust and debris, so when it comes to dust and airborne particles, these are generally drawn in through ventilation holes. This includes pretty much any device. If you go look, even your laptop has ventilation holes. So from time to time, do yourself a favor and go and check your laptop ventilation holes. You might want to go and clean them out, because if they get clogged because of dust, the laptop is not going to be able to get air in for those holes, and what's going to happen is it's going to start overheating. If it starts overheating, it can cause a lot of issues. And one of the issues is going to make your PC slower and slower and non-responsive. So this can prevent heat dissipation. So if it's not going to be able to ventilate properly, it's going to obviously overheat. That's the heat dissipation. The whole point of these air vents is normally there's a fan of some kind in there, and its purpose is to cool down this device, whatever it might be. This could be a printer, laptop, desktop, server, you name it. The point is to cool it down. And if it's clogged, that air vent, cooling down is not going to work so nice now, is it? So this can clog even keyboards and mice, but I think that's honestly going to be the least of your concerns. Can make your display hard to read, also the least of your concerns. I think honestly here the most important ones here on that list at the top is the air ventilation holes that get clogged and heat dissipation is not taking properly place there. Keyboards and mice and screens that's a little dirty, that's the least of your concerns. You can go use a cloth for that. Not really of concern. So you can control dust by doing some of the following. Cleaning these devices, especially the air vents. Screen, mouse, keyboard, yeah, if you feel like it, I suppose. But the air vents, that, my friends, very important. Maintaining HVAC filters. You'll find some devices like printers have special filters that needs to be cleaned out. Maintaining fan inlet air and dust filters. So some of these devices might have some sort of inlet air filters or dust filters. These need to be cleared out and cleaned out. If necessary, placing a system in an enclosure of its own air filters and fans. I've not seen people do that a lot. That's only something you'll maybe see of server environments. But even that, it's not something you'll see quite often. So, since we were talking about temperature and humidity and ventilation and all that, that brings us to these topics. So, as you guys can probably think for yourself, excessive heat affects computers' reliability. The hotter it gets or the warmer it gets, the less the airflow is, the slower the computer is going to be because it's going to get laggy. Heat is not dissipating the way it's supposed to. So this could be caused obviously by a lot of things. The first one being direct sunlight. Unlikely, but it is possible. It could even happen with a server room. I've seen server rooms which have actually had windows, and these windows would shine directly into the server room, directly onto the servers. So there's one time I had a server room, it was for the government for this country that I'm in, and this server room had a window, and every day around 4 o'clock, somewhere around 4 o'clock, I would say maybe between 3 and 5 o'clock, the sun would be just at the right angle in the late afternoon, where it would shine in exactly into that window, right on top of the servers. And normally during that time of day, the servers would just, for some reason, in quotes, get very, very slow and laggy. And they didn't know exactly why. They kept saying, we don't know what's going on. And once I went into the server room and I saw what was happening, I was like, you're kidding, right? How can you not know what was going on? So yeah, sunlight can cause a slow computer or a slow server to actually, slow down. So placement near a heat source, so any form of heat source is also bad, obviously. And then lastly, airflow. So you'll find that in a proper server room, they normally have air cons running there day and night, generally more than one on minimum. And it's also important that you put them in the correct places in the server room. It doesn't help you've got a lot of air cons, running there, cooling the room down, but they're not placed correctly. If they're not placed correctly, heat is not going to flow properly, or the cold air is not going to flow properly. So keep that in mind. Be mindful of that. Lastly, guys, humidity levels. As I've said earlier, humidity can actually cause an issue. If it's too low, it can cause an issue. If it's too high, it can cause an issue. So, regards to humidity that's too high, it can cause condensation. So, can you imagine condensation taking place in a server room on your circuitry? Yeah, not something we want to encounter. If it's too low, it can cause ESD, in other words, electrostatic discharge. So that's static. So if I go and touch something, it can actually cause static and it could potentially actually blow a component. Not so nice. So you generally want to try and get more or less 50% relative humidity. It's not always going to be that possible, but you want to try and get it as close as possible. So somewhere in the 40s, somewhere in the 60s should be more or less okay, but try and aim for the 50% benchmark. And then yes, guys, allow moved equipment to adjust to room temperatures before running. It's not just a myth, it actually does affect some of your equipment. So if you're going to move something like a server or a computer to an environment which is drastically different than the one it was in before, allow it to adjust. So if you're going to go and move it out of a very cold server room into a hot room and you're going to go and start it, not so nice. Allow it to adapt. And that obviously applies vice versa. If you're going to move something from room temperature into a cold server room, allow it to adjust for a few minutes before you actually go and turn it on. Here is a few general preventative maintenance tasks you guys can go and look at. So with regards to daily tasks, something you can go and do is no ventilation slot obstructions. Make sure there's nothing in front of your vents. So it's not that important because, what's the chances of something getting that dirty in one day? Unless you're in a very weird environment, I would say that's more something you're going to check once a week, once a month. Other things we're going to go and do is equipment is installed securely. Once again, that's not something that I'm going to be too concerned about. Unless you're the kind of person that's going to be moving your desktop PC around a lot, not something you need to be concerned about. Desktop PCs don't generally move around. Normally, you're going to go and plug it in, you're going to leave it in one place, and that's it. Laptops, on the other hand, those are the devices that's going to be moving around, but they're designed in a way for the components not to come loose. So it's not something we're going to be too concerned about, but that is still stuff that's listed by CompTIA, so we're going to mention it nonetheless. And then obviously, no liquid hazards. Now you'll be surprised, this actually could be something as simple as having a cup of coffee next to your laptop. We don't want a cooled drink or a coffee or a something next to a computer, a laptop, a desktop, anything for that matter. This includes even IT people. Anyone can make an accident. It is very easy to just accidentally bump your cup over onto your laptop, and yeah, that's going to be very awkward explaining that one to the IT team, especially if you are an IT person. It's one thing if a non-IT person goes and spills a cup of coffee on their keyboard, but if an IT person goes and breaks the laptop, it's a bit awkward. It's going to be a bit embarrassing for you to go and explain that one to the IT team. So things you can go and look at weekly: clean exterior of your monitor and system unit, clean keyboard and mouse. So not that important, it's just general maintenance tasks, just making sure it's neat and tidy. Monthly, check that fans are functioning correctly. Now, that is something you can maybe go and do, especially if it's an important PC or an important server. And then checking your cable connections. Honestly, if there was a cable connection issue, that's not something it's not something you're not going to know about. You're going to know about it. If your mouse is not working, if your keyboard's not working, if something is not working, you're going to go check your cables. So let's say my keyboard stops working immediately. I'm going to go check the cables. Maybe it's plugged out. If my screen doesn't turn on, well, I'm probably going to go check the cables. That's one of the things I'm going to go and check. So there's a lot of things they've mentioned here for us, CompTIA, but if you guys really go and look at them and you go and squint your eyes, you'll realize that these things are not that important. Yes, it's important to make sure your vents are unobstructed, make sure the fans are still working, but it's not something you're going to go and check that often. So, I mean, honestly, I would only go and check it once in 6 months if it was up to me. So most of these things are not as important as it might seem. So I would ignore this list for the most part. Now, with regards to general preventative maintenance, this includes, but it's not limited to, some of the things you see on the screen right now. So this is things like wearing a mask and gloves in certain situations, like working with dust or toner, which is ink, using compressed air to go and get dust or toner out of certain environments, like an electronic device, and using a vacuum, or should I say special kind of vacuum, to get dust out of certain places like a computer. So with regards to wearing a mask and gloves, this is normally done with when you're working with compressed air. We're not talking about the kind that you would use on some sort of hardware or like your car. This is a special kind of canister in most cases. It's designed to get dust out of things like your keyboard, out of computers and printers. It's a special kind of canister of compressed air specifically for electronics. And you also need to go and wear mask and gloves if you intend on working with toner. So, and whatever you do, try not to get this toner into your eyes, because that's not the situation you want to end up in. Also, try not to get a toner on the carpet or anything for that matter, because there's ink. It's going to go and stain certain things. And it's very easy to go and spill toner on a lot of things, especially if it's an old canister, an old toner cartridge that you're busy changing. Putting a new one in is not normally that big of a deal because it doesn't normally spill, but taking an old one out is a whole different ball game. In regards to this compressed air, as you can see, it dislodges dust from hard to reach places like inside of a computer box or inside of a laptop. So be aware of risk of contaminating the environment with dust. So if it's something like a computer box, what I like to go and do is I'll go and unplug that box if it's not mine, or if it's a client or a user's box. I'll take that box somewhere else, maybe outside or in a place where I can go and afford to have dust all over the place. You go and use the compressed air, it's going to get all over the place, but at least it's not in a client's environment. So using the controlled work area is what they're basically saying. Also be sure to wear a mask and maybe safety goggles. Not too concerned with dust when it comes with the goggles, but if you're going to be working with toner, be sure to wear safety goggles. You do not want to get toner in your eyes. And then regarding the vacuums, if you intend on using a normal vacuum, please make sure it's toner safe. But for the most part, do not use your normal office vacuum or house vacuum. You get special kinds of vacuums, toner vacuums, computer vacuums, PC vacuums even. These vacuums are designed to be used inside of your computer, and they do not cause what we call ESD. If you're going to go and use a normal vacuum, you're standing a very high chance of causing ESD, and you're a very good chance of potentially blowing a motherboard or something of that nature. Now, with regards to peripheral device and laptop maintenance, make sure you use wipes or cloths, and preferably with a solution that's designed for PC components. You'll find most of these solutions have some form of alcohol in them, like isopropyl alcohol. Oh, I'm struggling to pronounce that name. So this can be used on mice, keyboards, displays, and in some cases even something else. So as for laptop maintenance, make sure to keep the vents clear of dust and debris, especially laptops. So whenever possible, keep the laptop on a flat surface that's even, so the air vents can properly cool the laptop down. You'll find that in most laptops, the air gets sucked in at the bottom of the laptop, not the side, at the bottom. So on the bottom of the laptop, it sucks air in most cases, and with most laptop models, it blows it out the side of the laptop. So if the bottom of the laptop is smothered, or the side of the laptop, or both in some cases, yeah, that's going to make the laptop overheat, and it's obviously going to cause a whole bunch of issues we don't want to encounter. So if you are going to go and take your laptop and you want to maybe go and sit on the bed with the laptop, Yeah, that's not a good idea. Unless you've got maybe like a hardcover book underneath the laptop, don't do it. Okay, and next up we've got disposal, recycling, and compliance. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to disposing of things and recycling of things, this is inevitable. It's something we cannot avoid. It is going to happen, so all we can go and do is to try and adhere to all kinds of regulations and rules and laws and whatever it is in your specific environment. So make sure, first of all, your work environment or your company or your client's work environment is safe for people to work in. So anything that falls within your job description where you need to make sure that it's safe, make sure you do that. Otherwise, you might have a lawsuit in your hand, or worse, someone could actually lose their life. So hopefully it doesn't come down to that. So with regards to the OSHA compliant, employers must provide workplace free of recognized hazards, personal protective equipment. So if the environment requires personal protective equipment, this needs to be provided by the company. If it's not provided by the company and it's required, that's a lawsuit that possibly are going to be on your hands. And someone could obviously get hurt from that. Make sure things are labeled properly, especially things that's dangerous. So there's high voltage, high temperatures, cold temperatures, slippery, anything weird like that. It needs to be labeled, even if it's just a picture that shows watch out, high voltage. Now, MSDS is something you guys are going to hear a lot in CompTIA, and that is normally when it comes down to safety. Anything that's got to do with safety is MSDS. There may or may not be questions in the exam about this. I've seen sometimes in the exam they'll ask about safety. Anything in the exam that's about safety, I can almost guarantee you the answer will always be MSDS. So these are basically the safety and data sheets that's got to do with the safety. So anything safety related in the exam, if you're not sure what the answer is, I would say your default go-to answer should be the MSDS. Unless you understand the question, you can coincidentally see, okay, you know what? For this specific question, the answer is not MSDS. But you'll find 9 out of 10 times the answer in the exam is going to be MSDS when it's got something to do with safety. Now, what is your responsibility when it comes to all of this nonsense is be informed of potential hazards that affects you or your environment. So if you're going to be working on computers or servers and something and there's exposed wiring that's got high voltage, that is something you need to know about, obviously. Always use safe practices. This could be anything. It could be something as simple as turning a device off before opening it and working in it or on it. So take a printer, for example. We've talked about a printer before in this course. So if I'm going to go and open a printer like a laser printer, for example, before I do that, I'm going to go and unplug the printer and also allow 10, 15, 20 minutes for the printer to actually cool down. And then I'll go and work on the printer. So that is practicing safe behavior. And then lastly, environmental protection. Comply with environmental control requirements. If there's anything like that in your specific country or your environment, make sure you adhere to those requirements. So if you're not allowed to go and throw something in the bin, for example, well, then don't. Go and check what is the proper procedure to dispose of that specific item. This could be something like a toner cartridge, for example. In some countries or in some businesses, these toner cartridges literally get thrown in the trash. But in a lot of countries or a lot of areas, they actually have to be recycled. This is sometimes a law, even in some cases. So make sure you adhere to these requirements if there are any in your specific environment. Okay, guys, let's look at equipment inventory. Now, most people are under the impression that when we say equipment inventory, that it's just hardware in a company. And well, it's not completely wrong, but it's not just hardware. It could actually very well be other things as well, including software for that matter. So equipment inventory is when you, as the IT team, well, supposedly maybe not just the IT team, but generally it's the IT team, when you go and inventory all the hardware you've got in an organization. Sounds pretty straightforward, right? But what if you've got a few thousand people working in this organization? Could be your company, could be one of your clients' companies. So there's a few thousand people, and the average person has about 2 or 3 devices. That becomes quite a painstaking process to try and inventory all of that. And this inventory we're going to be doing is not just those people and their devices. It's all kinds of other assets as well. This could be random printers, It could be those office printers they share. It could be access points. It could be your routers. It could be pretty much anything for that matter. All the softwares you've got. So the purpose of this asset inventory is to help you see what you have in your company. So if I've got 1,000 people, I expect to have at least 1,000 machines on that inventory. If I don't have 1,000 machines, that means obviously we've got a shortage and we need to go make a plan. Now, never mind checking how many assets you've got, it's going to help you, stay ahead of the curve when it comes to upgrading these people. From time to time, every 2, 3, or 5 years, you're going to have to start upgrading these people. So if they're using laptops for argument's sake, these laptops are going to become outdated at some point. And obviously these laptops encounter wear and tear. Some of the people are going to start breaking the laptops, they're going to break keys, they're going to crack the screens, they're going to do all kinds of nonsense. So if you have, an inventory of all of that, it's going to help you plan a lot better when it comes to upgrading these folks. So I can go and see exactly who's got 8 gigs of RAM. And if I need to go and upgrade everybody to 16 gigs of RAM, I can see exactly who already has 16 gigs of RAM or more. So I'm not going to have to go and buy double or triple or the same laptops when it was not actually necessary to go and do that. It's going to save you a lot of money, and your just general planning is going to help you a lot more. So yeah, companies have various ways of going about this. Sometimes the folks would go manually to each and every PC and go and check what the hardware is. What kind of PC do you have, sir? Check what kind of RAM it has, what kind of CPU it has, what's the serial number, because what if that device gets stolen, whatever this device might be. So in the event of that device getting stolen, you are going to need that serial number because you're probably going to have to provide that to the authorities so they can go and check if they can find this device. Normally it's gone, but you never know. They might find it in a pawn shop or something somewhere. And the way they will identify that is normally by the serial number of this little product in most cases. So it's very crucial you go and document the serial number. Also for insurance purposes. The insurance is not going to go and pay out unless they can go and verify the serial number of these devices. So the serial number is probably one of the most important things you're going to have to go and make a note of all of your devices. Pretty much all your devices. Something else we also have is a schematic block diagram. Now, what I've seen with a lot of technicians, this obviously varies from company to company and from technician to technician, is these technicians will normally in their office, their workspace, have all kinds of stuff against the walls. Let's call it their walls. Sometimes it might be in the walls, it might be on the computers, but I've actually seen them print out posters and A4 papers and all kinds of stuff like that, and they will go put it against the walls. Now, these papers and these posters will have diagrams of that company or that building's network layout. So it shows them basically a picture of how the layout looks. How many rooms there are, how many pieces there are in each room, where are the access points, where are the routers, where is the firewall. It shows you everything you need to know network wise. It could possibly also show you other things. It could show you port IDs, security zones you guys can see, VLANs. So for those of you who don't know what a VLAN is, that's a virtual LAN. So a LAN is when you just go and connect PCs for the most part together in a building for the most part. Could be an office building, could be a home, a local area network is what a LAN is. VLAN is a virtual local area network. So by default, if you plug a lot of devices into one switch, they are generally on a LAN, but they're also on a VLAN. They're all on the same VLAN called VLAN 1 by default. Depending on what kind of switch you have, you'll be able to log on to that switch and actually go and subdivide those ports into multiple VLANs. I can, for argument's sake, go and make port 1 all the way to port 8 VLAN 1. And if this port has 16 switches, or 16 ports, if this switch has 16 ports, I can go and take port 9 all the way to port 16 and make that VLAN 2. So if someone plugs themselves into any port between 1 and 8, they'll be on VLAN 1. And if I go and plug myself into any port between 9 and 16, I'll be on VLAN 2. Even though we are plugged into the same physical switch, we might even have the same IP range, we will not be able to communicate with one another because it's a virtual LAN. So it's a way for you to create more LANs without actually having to, go and lay more cable parallel to the old cables and get more switches and all that. So it's going to save you a tremendous amount of time. It's going to save you a tremendous amount of money and equipment and all that. So it's a lot of things.
These diagrams can also have diagrams of your subnets. So that is how your network is subdivided. So using class A, class B, or class C. And within these classes of IP addresses, what subnetworks are you using? Are you using the full class C, the full class B? What does your network structure actually look like? So for those of you that know what subnetting is, that's more of a network topic. So if you guys are interested in what VLANs are and what subnets are, and that seems like it might be something interesting, please stay tuned for the CompTIA Network Plus course, which I'm going to start releasing very shortly after I conclude this A Plus course. So keep a lookout for that. If you have not done so already, remember to subscribe down below the notification bell, otherwise you will not know when I release those Network Plus episodes. All right. Then we also have something called reference documentation. There's pretty much not a technician alive that does not use reference documentation. So it doesn't matter how much experience you've got, you can have no experience, you can have 20 years of experience. Sooner or later, you are going to run into an issue where you just don't know what the problem is, or you just don't know what you're doing. It is going to happen. It happens to me, it happens to everyone. So if anyone tells you they've never had that happen to them, they're clearly lying, because there is no such thing as someone that knows everything, including myself. There is just no such thing. IT simply is too vast, and it simply just changes too rapidly. So these reference documentations could include, but it's not limited to what we see on our list here. It could be like a user installation manual. I mean, let's face it, most of us IT guys don't use those installation manuals. It could be an internet or a web-based resource, possibly a website. It's usually a website. So it might be like Microsoft's websites like GitHub, TechNet. It could possibly be doc.microsoft. We'll find all kinds of resources. CompTIA has also got quite a few nice resources. And you could even go to Reddit, mind you. If you go to Reddit and you go to the right subreddit on Reddit, you could possibly find a lot of folks there who can actually go and help you. So you can also go on to, guess what? YouTube. YouTube is technically kind of sort of a reference. So if you don't know, something about something, what are you going to go and do? You're going to go look it up. And that is technically what you guys are doing right now at this exact moment. You're watching a video on YouTube, and that's technically a form of reference. You're learning something someplace. Where is that someplace? It's on YouTube. It's online, isn't it? So you got wikis, almost like Wikipedia. There's all kinds of wikis you get online. Articles. That's kind of like the doc.microsoft I was referring to earlier. There's quick reference manuals, and there's obviously training materials as well. Once again, I think this one that we're doing right now is kind of sort of training material. It is, but it's not. It could be a training manual. It could be slideshows. It could be a lot of things. It could be labs. Maybe it's practical exercise you guys have been doing. So these reference documentations comes in many shapes and sizes. But what they all have in common is it is something that's going to help you solve a problem or gain more knowledge, which is one of my end goals of this course. That's one of the reasons I'm doing this whole A plus course for you guys, is to help those in need that cannot afford to do this course. So that's one of my goals here. And well, I suppose I also like helping people. That's one of the benefits. I'm a social bunny, and I like helping people. And I also want to give some sort of resource for people to go and use. So at least if someone needs something, to go and reference, at least now you guys have something to go and reference. Now, since we are kind of sort of approaching the end of the A plus course, there's quite still a few topics left, so don't go and leave me just yet. But if you guys feel like you want to go and donate, you can go and check in the description down below. In all my videos, I do have like a PayPal account there, and you can also become a Patreon of my channel if you feel like it. I've got a Patreon account as well. At the moment, my Patreon account does not have any tiers. I think there's like one tier there. And on that one tier, you're basically just going to become a member. There's no real benefits besides supporting the channel. And what's going to happen is your name is going to show at the end of each video. So if you want that to happen, I can have your name displayed at the end of each video. So there's going to be a section that says Patreons. At the moment, there is none at the making of this video, because I literally just released the Patreon. I thought, okay, well, someone's been nagging me, I should go and make it. So if you feel like you want to become one, at the end of each video from this point forward, there's going to be a Patreon section where your name could possibly show as long as you are a member of this channel. Now, something else we also get is incident documentation. So incident management, a set of practices and procedures that govern how an organization will respond to an incident. Now, an incident is not something specific, guys. This could be anything. For the most part, it's probably going to be IT related, but it could potentially be non-IT related. This could be a medical incident, it could be theft, it could be a fire. Those also classify as incidents, as we've specified before in this course in a previous module. So when something happens, this could be physically, this could be digitally. When this incident happens, as you guys can see in the little pictures or a little example, you're going to have to describe what the incident was. Now, the template's obviously not necessarily going to look like that. Each company has its own little template you're going to have to go and complete. What was the incident? You might say, you know what, this was theft. Well, was it physical theft? Was it digital theft? Did someone steal a screen, a computer, a laptop? What did they steal? Or did they steal something digitally speaking? Did they steal information from the company? Did they steal licenses? What are we talking here? Are we talking something physical? Is it digital? Is it IT in nature? What is it? When was this? Where was this? So you're going to have to give as much information as you possibly can. And it's going to be used by lots of parties. It's going to be used possibly by the authorities, depending on what the incident was. It could possibly be used by your company or other people for research purposes. It could be used for auditing purposes. It can be used for whatever purposes. There's a lot of things it could potentially be used for. So there's actually a lot of documentation needs to be completed in companies, not just for incidents. Some companies have what we call a change management document. So whenever you, as the technician in a large company, wants to go and do some sort of change, you have to go and put it on paper first. Although these days it might not be physical paper, it might be digital paper. You're gonna have to go and put in a request, so to speak, where you request to go and do this change, or at the very least, you're documenting what this change is. It could be software, it could be hardware, it could be anything. So if I need to go and swap the hard drive on a server because the old one has failed, I'm gonna have to go and complete a change document for that, where I specify who changed this hard drive, when was this hard drive changed, why was it changed, what did I do with the old one, where did I get the new one, all kinds of stuff like that, so that if something goes wrong later on, they can backtrack and see where did they go wrong. This could be for many reasons. It could be because maybe something went wrong because something got lost or stolen or broken, or maybe this is just going to be used for research purposes, so they can go and backtrack and see how this was done. How did we solve that particular problem? Now, speaking of change, the process for instituting change to operational policies and procedures. So this includes, but is not limited to, things like implementation of changes should be carefully planned. You're not going to go ahead and just randomly go and do something. This could be something digitally, could be something physically. This needs to be planned. So especially when it comes to server environments, this sometimes takes weeks, if not months, of planning and testing. There's most likely going to be some form of trial or pilot involved. We're going to go and test this for an X amount of time. And if the results meet your expectations and your requirements and your needs and all those fancy words, then you will proceed to actually fully and officially deploy that in that organization, whatever it is we're talking about. This could be something as simple as server. It could be something as simple as deploying Windows 11 to your company. So maybe you don't trust Windows 11 yet because it's still fairly new. So you're going to go and run this on only 10 PCs, and after 6 months or so, if it meets all your expectations, then you might decide to go deploy this to the rest of the company. Now, second point there is organizations should attempt a trial implementation for major changes, which is just what we just said. That's a pilot, in other words. Point 3 is create a rollback or remediation plan. So in other words, if this does not work out the way we planned, what are we going to do? What's your backup plan here? So if it was something digital, is there a way for us to get back to the way we were? Are we going to go resort to using some form of backup, perhaps, if it was like an installation we had to go and do? If it's a physical rollout of something physically, do we still have the old stuff, if it's applicable in the situation? So what is your plan of action so that if this stuff does not work out, so that you can go back to how you were, or as close as possible to how you were? This might not seem like a big deal, but trust me, this is a big deal. Surprisingly, there's quite a few times when stuff really does not work out the way you planned. Even though you planned it and you tested it, sometimes life does not go the way you planned. So there's a saying where they say life is what happens while you're busy making other plans. So when that happens, when stuff doesn't go according to plan, what are you going to do about it? Point 4, schedule changes to have minimal impact on workflow. Now, unfortunately, sometimes it's unavoidable. You sometimes just can't avoid the impact on workflow. But if at all possible, try and arrange whatever this is to happen over a weekend, at night, on a public holiday. So you don't want to try and do stuff during the middle of working hours or business hours, depending on which country you're in. So this includes something as simple as a backup. If I want to go and do a backup, if I want to go and do whatever, I'm not going to go and do that in the middle of working hours. It's going to slow the network down. And it might even do like some sort of, update or restarts. If I want to go and do a Windows update, that might restart the people's PCs. Can you imagine that happening in the middle of working hours? That's not very professional, and there could potentially be a loss of data, which means a loss of money for your company. We want to try and avoid that. Point 5, after the change is implemented, assess its impact. Check if it actually still is working. So this is probably when it's already beneficial and all that, but you still need to keep an eye on it. You never know. Something can still go wrong at the last minute. So after it's officially been deployed and it looks like your head is through, that doesn't necessarily mean you are through. Something could still very well go wrong. You never know. And then lastly, guys, review the process and document the outcomes. Whether it's a success or a failure, it doesn't matter. You need to review the processes you followed. What were all the steps? What did you do? And what was the outcome of each step? So this is for all kinds of purposes. Once again, it could be for auditing purposes, it could be for research purposes, it could be for any kind of purposes. So if something goes wrong, at least then later on you or fellow IT colleagues in the future can go through your documentation and see, okay, you know what? This is where we went wrong because we did it this way, and maybe, just maybe, we should have done it this way instead. Or it could just be for, I don't know, auditing purposes. So it probably has no limits to it. You're only limited by your imagination in the day. All right, so since we were talking about how are you going to get back to your original state should something go wrong, this is going to kind of add on to that, not exactly. So you can see this one is disaster prevention, but also recovery. So we want to do the best we can to prevent a disaster in the first place from happening. But should something happen, because sometimes it is unavoidable, what is your plan for recovery? So DRP, which is Disaster Recovery Plan, a documented and resource plan showing actions and responsibilities to be used in response to critical incidents. It doesn't help you wait for the chickens to come home to roost first, and only then do you decide to do, you know what, let's go and probably establish a plan of action. That's not going to help you much. That's called being reactive. You need to be proactive. Plan for worst case scenario before it even happens. So I suppose you can compare this to some sort of insurance. It's like having insurance in your car. So you're not going to get insurance with the hopes of getting into a car accident. You're going to get insurance for your car in case you should get into an accident. But you're still going to hope that you don't actually get into a car accident. So the first thing you're going to go and do is you're going to have to go and identify possible scenarios that your company could very well encounter in the foreseeable future, both physical and digital. So physically, is there any chance for any physical disaster like a fire, a riot, an earthquake, theft, anything like that? And then digitally speaking, this could be maybe a virus, it could be ransomware, it could be a hacking attack. What are the potential scenarios you could face in the future? And what are your options for mitigating those scenarios? What are you going to do to protect your data and your environment? And what are you going to go and do to recover should you get compromised either way? So, should you get compromised in some sort of physical or digital manner, what are you going to do about it to protect yourself against that? And should it get past your protection, what are you going to do to recover from that? What are your plans? So, this might not just be you, depending on how big your company is and how many teammates you have. You're probably going to have to go and sit down with your colleagues and discuss this. There's going to have to be a very long, hard, important discussion with no fooling around. And since we are talking about backing up, that leads us to our next topic being data backup and restoration. The data backup is probably one of the most important things in IT. So whenever you're about to go and do something big or small, it is always important for you to go make a backup, or at very least make sure you have a backup in case something goes sideways. So this could be something as simple as you going onto a user's computer, maybe it's in their personal capacity, Small computer in a home environment. You're going to go over to their home. You need to go and do some basic stuff there on that PC. But before you do anything, you need to make sure there's a means or a way for you to recover that system in case you make things worse. You might think to yourself, well, how am I going to make things worse? I'm an IT guy. I know what I'm doing. Well, believe it or not, there is times when things really do not work out the way you intend. So I'm going to give you a scenario. Maybe there's something weird wrong on this computer. It could be a weird driver, a program is acting up, something of that nature. And maybe you decide to go and use System Restore, which effectively sends the PC back in time. But as you guys are well aware by now, if you've watched this whole course, System Restore does not just change one thing, it changes many things. So it's a matter of you need to use that tool with caution. So maybe the problem you were experiencing or this user was experiencing, maybe that has been resolved by using System Restore. But at the same time, when you use System Restore, it made two other problems now. So you solved one problem, but you made two other problems now. So you might have very well have made matters worse. So if that happens to be the case, there needs to be a means for you to go and restore the PC at least back to the way it was. You can never leave the user or the client worse off than what they were. So ideally, you want to go and fix the whole scenario and resolve the issue. But if for some weird reason you cannot resolve the issue, at the very least, you do not want to leave that person worse off than what they were. I mean, that's not going to make a very good technician of you now, is it? Now, the way and the means you can go and use to go and back up this data can be done via many ways. System Restore is a form of backup, but it's not going to back up data. Just bear that in mind in case you guys decide, okay, I want to go and use System Restore. It's a good way to go and recover a machine, but it does not recover data. So for that, you might need to go and use Windows Backup. That's one way. There's many other kinds of backup software out there on the market. Some of them cost money. Some of them are freeware. So you don't necessarily need to go and spend money to be able to get yourself decent backupping software. So if you go search hard enough on the internet, there's many kinds that's free. You can go and use them. So if you're not sure what to go and search for, maybe go and ask someone that's in the field already, a fellow technician, someone that you know is a computer technician, and ask them what tools are they aware of that can be used for backupping, and if they are aware of any of these tools that might be free, at least just to get you kick-started for the most part. Now, some of the ways you can go about backing up, as you guys can see there way at the bottom, is to go and copy files and folders to local or network locations. You will notice that it's scratched out because that is not a very good way to go and do that. So if you're going to go and copy files and folders to the local location, that means you're technically on the same device. So that's not exactly a backup if the backup is on the same device that you're backing up. So it kind of is like locking your keys in your car. It's going to be kind of pointless to go and do that. Network locations, well, that's not the worst thing. It depends on where this location is that's on the network. This could be a file server, then it's not so bad. It could be a NAS drive, then it's not so bad. So it depends on how you look at it. Realistically, the way you're going to want to go and backup is to go and use some sort of image backup, which is one of the most popular ways to go and backup. It's not the best way necessarily. It's not the only way necessarily, but it's one of the most popular ways to go and do it, is to go and make an image backup. So for those of you who don't know what an image backup is, you're basically going to go and make a clone of that server or that computer, digitally speaking. You're going to go and store that digital image somewhere. Maybe it's on a server, maybe it's in the cloud. And should something happen to your computer, that person's computer, that server, you can literally go and grab the same PC after formatting it, or grab a different PC or server after formatting it, and you can go and restore that image onto that PC or that server. It's going to be exactly the way it was when you made that restore point, or whenever you made that restore point. Now, since we are talking about backups, it's worth mentioning that you do get different kinds of backupping. I'm not talking about the various kinds of software you get. So if you have no backups in place at all yet for yourself, for this client or that company, you're probably going to have to go and do what we call a full backup. Now, it kind of explains itself. It's a full backup means you back up everything. And if you're going to be backing up everything, it kind of makes sense that it's going to take a very long time to go and back up everything. So that's not something you want to go and do in the middle of business hours. You're going to probably want to do that after hours or over a weekend. So I recommend doing that after hours over a weekend. It could very well take an hour. It could take hours. It could take a day, maybe two. Based on my experience, it normally takes a few hours to go and do a full backup, depending on what it is you're backing up. Now, full backup is something you normally just do once, because once you've done it, you've obviously backed up everything. Now, if you need to go and restore some sort of system, whether it be a computer or a server, how many backup copies do I need to use to get that system back to the state it was? You'll see that in the middle column there where it says backup slash restore time, 1 media set. Now that means I only need to use one full backup copy and I'll be able to get that system back up exactly the way it was. I'm only using one copy of the full backup because the full backup is a full backup. It explains itself. The incremental backup, as you guys can see, is new files and files modified since the last backup. Now, you cannot go and make an incremental backup if you don't have at least one full backup, which is not always mentioned in these courses. So you're going to start off by doing at least one full backup, and from that point forward, you will go and do incremental or differential or both of those every day, once a week, and once a month. So most companies will do one full backup in the initial stage, and from there on, they might do an incremental backup once a day, once a week, and once a month. So this is just to ensure they've got all kinds of backups. So should something happen today, what happens yesterday, I can go use the incremental backups and I can go use the one I made yesterday or the day before that. I'm not going to need necessarily the full backup to go and restore the way back it was. If it happened like last week, I might have to use one of the week backups. So I'm going to go and use a backup that I do weekly. If it happened last month, I'm going to maybe have to use one of the bigger backups, which gets done like once a month. So if it's going to be a daily backup, it's going to go a lot quicker because there's not much changed in one day. So what it's going to go and do is, as you guys can see, it's only going to go check what is new and what has been modified and only back up that. So if someone made new files, that gets backed up. If someone modified an existing file, that gets backed up. So if a file has not been changed and if nothing has been added, nothing gets backed up because there's nothing to back up. The full backup technically still has all the stuff if you think about it. Differential is all modified since the last full backup. So a little bit more inclusive. So there's a lot of similarities between incremental and differential. End of the day, which one you choose is up to you and your unique environment. I cannot decide for you because every company, as you guys know, is unique just like a human. But based on my experience, most companies will do at least one full backup. And from there, they'll go and do incremental backups daily, weekly, and monthly. And if at all possible, you're going to want to go and do an offsite backup, guys. It's very important to also go and do offsite backups. An offsite backup is kind of like the name suggests. It's a backup that's not physically in the office. This backup copy gets stored offsite. It's not plugged in, and hopefully you never have to go and use this backup. But should something terrible happen, like the building burns down or something like that, you can go and resort to using the offsite backup to restore to back the way you were. You can go buy yourself some new servers, use the offsite backup, and you can go restore back the way you were. Now, what we also like to go and do is these offsite backups, one of them actually does get stored offsite in an undisclosed location. But we sometimes go make another clone of that, and that offsite backup, in quotes, gets stored on site. We call it offsite, but it's actually on site. It's just not plugged in. So if this is a huge disaster that happens, but it's a digital disaster like a ransomware attack or something, you're going to want to get back up and running as quickly as possible. And if I had to go and wait for the actual offsite backups to come back to the office, that could take days, if not weeks, because it's an undisclosed location. It could even be in a different country, those physical backups. So I need to get back up and running as quickly as possible. So wouldn't it be nice if I had a physical backup in a safe somewhere? Maybe it's like a hard drive locked up in a safe somewhere that I can go and use. Then you're going to go use that. But if the building burned down, then you're going to have to go and use the offsite backup. So this is very expensive to go and make these offsite backups, but the more you can make and the more regularly you can go and make them, the better for you. Now, something you guys are definitely going to have to go and do once you've made these backups yourself is to go and test these backups. It doesn't help you much if you're going to go and do all of this effort doing all of those backups, but you don't actually know if they work because you've never tested them. So what you're going to have to go and do is you're going to have to go and simulate a scenario. And normally we plan this ahead of time. We're going to go and plan it maybe over the weekend or something. You preferably don't want to do this in the middle of production time. I suppose you could, but I could obviously influence production. So over the weekend or after hours, You can on purposely gonna go and break something, on purposely go and crash a PC, crash a server, or break something, and it's gonna be on purpose. And the idea of this exercise is for you to go and use your backups then to see if you can restore that machine back to the way it was and how quickly you can go and do it back to the way it was. Ideally, you want to make sure that you can and that you do this as quickly as possible because time quite literally is money in most cases. Now, looking at our points here, you can see it says try restoring some of the backup data into a test directory. Make sure you don't overwrite any data when testing. You don't want to go and actually lose data for real while testing. Configure backup software to verify after it writes. Verify that the backup contains all the required files. It doesn't help you've got a backup, but it doesn't have everything in it. And then lastly, test backup devices and media on a regular basis. So the norm is normally to go and do it at least once a month. You can go and make it more regularly. You can make it less regularly. I don't recommend making it less regularly, but at the end of the day, this decision remains in your hands, guys. Now here you guys can more or less see what we were just talking about with regards to offsite backups and actually storing them offsite and having an offsite backup and keeping one of them on site for quick access. Now looking at our first point there, you can see backups are usually stored offsite. Yes and no. I don't fully agree with that statement. So for most of my clients, we normally have an offsite backup, which is legit offsite. And then we also tend to have an offsite backup, which is kept on site and it's locked in a physical safe or some sort of metal cabinet or something like that of that nature, so that in the event of a digital disaster, we can get them back up and running as quickly as possible. So looking at the first point there still, the subcategory says, in case of a disaster at the server, the backup media is not lost as well. And safety deposit box or with a firm that specializes in securely storing backups. So you can go and do that. So it might be a situation that maybe I am this firm that's going to go and store their backup for them. Although that was never the case. Normally, I would go and make the backup. And if it's going to get stored legit off-site, they will go and give it to someone somewhere or some company somewhere that's going to store it off-site. I, as the technician, don't even know where that undisclosed location is. Hence the name undisclosed. So yeah, they also mentioned keep a backup set on site for instant access. So that's in the event of something like a ransomware attack or maybe it's just corrupted files. And then lastly, obvious stuff, environmental considerations must be taken into account. So you don't want to go and store these backups in locations where it's very hot, very cold, very humid, where there's magnetic fields nearby because that could potentially damage the hard drive or just completely destroy the hard drive for that matter. Especially if we're talking about magnetic fields. So don't go put it near heavy machinery. Don't go put them near something like, what can we think of? Maybe large power strips because power strips gives off EMI. Don't put them near speakers because speakers gives off obviously magnetic fields. So any obvious stuff like that, don't go and store them there. So go put them in a safe or go put them in a metal cabinet somewhere. Go lock them up behind lock and key. Now moving on to account recovery, not data recovery, account recovery. This is not a specific account that's in mind here. This is just general. It could be your local Windows account, it could be any kind of account, it could be a Gmail account. So regards to general accounts in general, different things can happen to prevent logon. So maybe you've got locked out because you forgot your password. So they mention things like mistyped or forgotten password. So maybe you just typed the character wrong in the password, you typed the character wrong in the username or the email address. That could be a reason why you can't log on. So if you just try and retype it, that could resolve the issue. If you forgot the password, what's going to resolve that issue? Well, in most cases, just resetting the password. And if you reset the password, it might ask you for a bunch of answers to a bunch of security questions. It could be something like sending in OTP, a one-time PIN, to a device that only you have access to, like your phone. Once you provide the PIN, you can go and reset the password. It could be some sort of app that you have to install where you have to go and do some sort of acknowledgement. So yeah, it could be a lot of things. You could potentially also be locked out of an account if something does not want to process properly, like a smart card or some form of biometric credentials. So maybe it's a fingerprint scanner, and maybe you've got like some sort of huge cut on your finger because of an accident, and now it does not want to read your fingerprint properly until it heals properly, and now you're getting an error. So that's a different kind of account, but still a possible situation you might face. Many systems support account recovery, as we've said with the forgotten password feature, and this is normally going to be a matter of a bunch of challenge questions, like where were you born? What was the name of your first pet? What was the name of your first school? What's the name of your childhood friend? Those common kinds of questions. So these are the challenge questions they're referring to. Now, should you find yourself in the unfortunate position where you are unable to recover your account, this is probably not going to be an Active Directory account then, because Active Directory accounts can be recovered by the administrators in the back end. So it's probably going to be an account that only you had access to in the first place, you in your own personal capacity. So should you have an account in your personal capacity that you're unable to recover for whatever reason, then you might have no other choice than to go and recreate the account. So hopefully, if that is the case, you are not going to lose any data in the situation, because you probably will. You can see there it says you will need to import backed up data to the new account, assuming you have data that's backed up. Now, if you could not gain access to the old account, you might very well have no data that's backed up. There might be data that you wanted to back up, but you did not have the chance to back it up because you could never get into the account to go and do the backup. And then lastly on this list, depending on what kind of account we're talking about here, you may or may not need to go and reconfigure file permissions and group memberships. That sounds more like an Active Directory account. And if it is an Active Directory account, then I don't know what they were talking about here, because the rest of the stuff here doesn't make sense then. Since if it was an Active Directory account, the administrator of the Active Directory has the ability to go and reset that password for you. So if you had to go and recreate the account from Active Directory's perspective, then you might as well have just gone and reset the password for the old Active Directory account. An administrator has the ability to go and reset an account, the password to an account, without knowing the password to the old account. Just FYI, in case you guys don't know. Alright guys, so we're slightly moving away from backupping, recovering, and that kinds of stuff now. So you can see now we've got a new topic, customer service attitude. And the rest of the remaining topics for this module is going to be very similar in the same category as this one. So obviously you need to be a person that's very easy to communicate with. So whatever language you're using to speak to your clients, let's assume it's English, you need to speak proper English. None of you guys have picked up yet, you probably would have picked up by now that I'm actually not English at all. English is not my language. I'm actually speaking different languages. So if you guys could follow my English, then well, I suppose kudos to me, because I'm not English at all actually. So competent technicians with poor communication skills do not impress customers. Yeah, man, can you imagine you go to a customer and you go IR speak English very deliciously? It's not going to help you very much. You're definitely not going to impress the customer. You're not going to make a very good impression. It could be that maybe you know exactly what you're doing. You've got very good skill. But if your communication skills are going to suck, it's going to make you sound incompetent, even though you are competent. So I've had that where sometimes people sound as dumb as a bag of doorknobs. Meanwhile, they're very intelligent. It's just because they can't speak English properly, property, because they can't speak English properly, then they sound a lot dumber than what they actually are. And this applies to pretty much any language. So use proper grammar, speak your language fluently, and make sure you understand the problem or the product at hand here. So you can see here, good customer service includes things like being positive, be clear, concise, and direct. No shenanigans, get straight to the point. Hi, sir, how are you? What seems to be the problem? And then they explain the problem to you. They generally mention that you should allow the customer or the client to finish the description of the problem. You might find that maybe within the first 5 seconds you already know what the problem is, because obviously you are the engineer or the technician here that's got the experience. But if the client's still busy explaining, let them finish. So only after 5 or 10 minutes you might want to go and start interrupting them, but you're going to have to do it very politely. So generally customers want to feel like they're heard. So you actually already know in the first 5 seconds what the problem is. But even if that's the case, let them finish for like a whole minute or two, explain the problem, and you just tell them something along the lines of, okay, sir or ma'am, I hear what you're saying. I think I know what the problem is. I'm going to have a look and I'm going to get right back to you. So straight to the point, polite, but you also hear them out. So since we are talking about communication skill and language and grammar, you can see it here. Use proper language. Avoid the use of jargon, acronyms, and slang when applicable. So maybe I might say something along the lines of, yo, my homie, and I might use all kinds of little slang and whatever you might come across. But do the best to your ability not to do that. So whatever language you're going to use to communicate with this client, this end user, or this customer, try and speak the language as fluently as possible. So if it's English, do the best you can to speak the language as fluently as possible. It's going to make them understand you better. It's going to make you seem more professional, and they're going to feel more comfortable leaving this problem in your hands because they're going to feel you're capable of doing whatever it is that needs to be done. You can see here it says actively listen to the customer, as I've said before. Do not interrupt them if possible. Sometimes there might be no way around that. So like I said, sometimes the customer is going to go on yapping for like 10-20 minutes, and you actually already knew in the first 5 seconds. Then you might have to very politely, very politely try and interrupt them. Sorry, so maybe say something along the lines of, sorry sir, ma'am, I think I hear what you're saying. I think I know what the problem is. Based on what you've told me, I think I know what the problem is. Let me just go quickly have a quick peek so I can have you back on your way as quickly as possible. So that they might appreciate. So it's all about how you go about it. You can see here it says use open and closed questions to elicit information. It depends on the situation. So open is when you force the person indirectly without them knowing to give you more than a one word answer. So you might say something along the lines of, in your opinion, how would you explain this problem? So if I say something like that, you're going to force the customer most likely to give you more than a one word answer. Close-ended questions is when I ask you something like a yes or a no kind of question. It's a one-word answer. I'm going to say, did you unplug the PC before that lightning storm? Yes or no? And she's going to be like, no. And I'm like, okay, cool. There we go. Power supply has been blown. That's a closed-ended question. And then lastly, guys, on this list, provide feedback to gain reports. So what's nice is if you're going to go and inform the client as regularly as possible of what's going on, whether you are making progress or not. Man, you may have encountered this once or twice in your life. Hopefully you've done. Not necessarily of IT, where wherever you go, that company will call you back and give you a status report. So maybe you're taking your car in for a service, for argument's sake. Wouldn't it be nice if they call you, let's say once an hour, and say, okay, sir, we are about to start of your service now. Everything is looking good. And then after another 2 hours, they said, okay, sir, we have commenced the service, but we have picked up that blah, 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 and your car is a little bit worn out. Would you like us to leave that? Or would you like us to do something about it while we have the car on the lifts? And then you might say, sheesh, I did not know that. You know what? While it's on the lift, go ahead, fix it for me, add it to my bill. So wouldn't it be nice if they can go and inform you regularly of things like that? So that was actually part of my job once upon a time. So what I had to go and do is, would I fix problems or not? 8 o'clock every morning, if there was any job cards or tickets still open, I had to go and call every client, every customer, and give them an update, whether it's been resolved or not. And tell them, sir, ma'am, this is the status of things. We have done the following because we suspect the following, and this is what the results were. So the problem has not been resolved yet. What we're going to do next is going to be X, Y, and Z, and then hopefully we'll achieve, I don't know, A, B, and C. So you just give the customer an update as to what you've done, what the outcomes was, what you're going to do, and what you expect the outcome might be. So, I mean, that's just nice, keeping people in the loop. Some people don't care, but a lot of people really appreciate an update like that. I mean, it's probably very annoying when you were expecting a reply after about a day and it's been like days or weeks and you have not heard a word from that company. It might be a company that's looking after your car. Maybe they're fixing your car. Maybe they're fixing your phone. They're fixing your computer. And you just have not heard back from that company at all yet. You've got no idea if they've even started on your item yet, your problem yet. You've got no idea if it's serious or not. You've got no clue what's going on. So put yourself in that person's shoes. What would you like to experience? And once you are able to put yourself in that person's shoes, you're going to be able to get this done a lot easier as soon as you put yourself in the other person's shoes. Okay, guys, so we are moving on to a category I like to call professionalism. Now, there's actually a lot of items on this list. There's not all of them. I'm going to get to the rest in just a moment. So the first section here is proper documentation helps you set realistic expectations. It includes, but is not limited to, things like contact information. So should someone need to contact you, they should have your number and your email. Should you need to contact the customer or the client or the end user, You need to have their information. Just make sure that you've got permission to have certain types of information. In some countries, it's not allowed to have certain information without the person's approval. Make sure you have stated the hours of operation. So if it is something like a level 1, 2, or 3 call, it might be a matter of this has to happen within business hours, which might very well be something like from 8 o'clock in the morning until about roughly 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And depending on what the problem is and how severe it is, you might have like a category 4 or category 5 or level 4 or level 5, where customers could potentially contact you after hours and you will still assist with that. So this is something like when a server is crashed or when there's a ransomware attack. Most companies will then assist even if it's after hours then, because that's all hands on deck. So it depends on what the situation is. I suppose it depends on if this is an SLA agreement. So if hours are applicable, make sure they are stated clearly somewhere. Make sure items that are supported are listed. How long to resolve incidents is also listed. So should that be applicable? I know sometimes in some cases it's not easy to estimate how long it's going to take. It's random. It's a case by case kind of situation. Mention or list when an item will be replaced rather than repaired. So kind of give like a situation or a scenario as to when more or less would you decide to go and rather replace something than repair something. Where is the line in the sand, so to speak? So you can maybe go and say, you know what, we've got a list of items here, something like a power supply. So in the event of a power supply failing, we're most likely going to go and replace it and not repair it. Then the problem management section, that's pretty much what we said earlier. Clarify customer expectations of what will be done. So in other words, when you start, you give the customer a more or less idea as to what you suspect the problem is, and more or less as to how long you think it will take based on your past experience to go and resolve this issue. Obviously, it's not set in stone. I mean, obviously, you're not a genie, you're not going to know everything. It's just to give them an idea at least. So if you're going to tell them, sir, I don't know exactly how long, I estimate this to take us between 4 and 6 hours. At least then they've got something to go on. Once again, put yourself in the customer's shoes. What would you like to experience if you were that person? And then the second point there is address customer concerns about cost or impact on business processes. You might think, okay, well, what if they don't ask? Well, a lot of customers, believe it or not, are actually very concerned about the cost, especially of business processes. So even if they don't ask, it might be a good idea for you to mention it anyway. So as you start addressing this customer, tell them, sir, ma'am, I estimate this to take us more or less 4 to 6 hours, and I estimate the cost to be around blah blah blah. You give them a figure. I estimate this to be around 200, around 400 or 600, whatever your currency is. Go make up a number. So you give them a more or less idea as to how much this might possibly influence their business as well, if it's going to be in the middle of production time. So assuming this is in the middle of production time, let's say it's within working hours, in other words, you can tell them, sir, this is going to potentially influence your work for another 1 hour. So for 1 hour, the server is going to be offline. There's nothing we can do about it, but at least then he or she knows that, you know what, it's going to be off for 1 hour, but that's about the benchmark. So you're giving them something to go on. They're not completely blind here. At least they have an idea of what's going on and the extent of the damage. If you have any possible constraints on your side, in the sense of maybe time, parts that you've got available, costs involved, contractual obligations, anything like that, you want to mention that to the customer as well. It doesn't help you get started and only halfway through do you mention to the customer that, oh dear me, my bad, I forgot to mention that I'm not allowed to go and do this because of some sort of conflict of interest. Or sorry, sir, I'm only going to be able to help you next week because I do not have the parts. That is kind of important. That's something that they probably would have liked to have known before you got started, because then maybe they would have gone with someone else. Now, you might have lost a customer, but at least they would have appreciated the fact that you were professional. And they may have come back to you in the future, where now, because you did not tell them you have no parts, they will most definitely not come back to you in the future because they see you're a scoundrel that doesn't tell them what they need to know. And then our last one here is reach a course of action that is realistic and achievable. You're not going to go and mention all kinds of things to the customer which is unachievable. You're not going to go and do that. You don't oversell yourself, you undersell yourself, and you over deliver. So if you think it's going to take 4 hours, you tell the customer it's going to take 5 hours. And if you go and finish it in 4 hours, well, obviously that's great. If you think it's going to cost 500, you tell them it's going to cost 600. And if it costs less, well, that's a pleasant surprise. You don't want to tell the customer it's going to cost 500 and it ends up costing 600. That's bad. You don't want to tell the customer it's going to take 4 hours and it ends up taking longer than 4 hours. That's bad. So you always promise something and over deliver, not under deliver. So you undersell yourself and over deliver is what you're going to go and do. Now, other important things you guys need to take into consideration in the professionalism category is things like use a ticketing system to support proper documentation of all support requests. Most companies have some sort of ticket or job card or something that needs to be logged. It could be for your own company. It could be like the companies where I was working. I was an engineer where I was not just supporting one company, I was supporting hundreds, if not thousands of companies. And these companies would log a ticket, sometimes referred to as a job card. And on this job card, it will go and list everything about the problem, the nature of the problem, and all that. So if you are in some sort of sense maybe in charge of this ticketing system, or if you're gonna have to go and give it some sort of input from your side as the technician, always make sure you use proper spelling and grammar, because obviously that's gonna give a nice little impression to the customer. It's not gonna look nice if you're gonna go and spell and gram like clown on those papers. So make sure that your gramming and your spelling is proper. Be clear in case others need to use the information to resolve the issue. So for all you know, you might get preoccupied with a different ticket or job card, and now another technician needs to take over from you. So if your handwriting is going to look sloppy, if it's a situation of you having to write this down with your hand, or if your spelling or your grammar is going to be poor, then you might also make the other technician's life a little bit difficult because they're going to have to try and decipher what you wrote down there, which can be a problem. Be aware that the customer may or may not receive the contents of the ticket. So write that message on the ticket as if the customer is going to read it as well. So always write it with the intention that the customer might possibly read it. At least then, should they go and read the ticket for whatever reason, you can't get into poop, or it's not going to be awkward or embarrassing or unprofessional for that matter. Also, strive for resolution in one service call. So when this is not possible, manage customer expectations. When the issue is resolved, communicate the general cause and solution to the customer and thank them for their assistance. So even if you feel like the customer does not need to know, you might feel like it's none of their business, it's still just good customer service to call the customer afterwards or even see them in person, assuming COVID restrictions allow that, or if you're near enough to see the customer, see them in person, call them afterwards, tell them what you thought the problem was, what it ended up being, what you did to resolve the issue, and what the cost is. Give them a full feedback as to what the whole procedure was. Prioritize your work, be punctual and accountable, be flexible, and seek compromise when necessary. And then our last topic for today's module and the last topic for the A plus course is respect, guys. Avoid distractions during a service call. So it is not going to be exactly professional if you are on site at a client's premises. Maybe it's in their house, maybe it's in their business, or maybe you're just going to an end user and you're getting a personal call on your phone, and here you are WhatsApping, texting, answering personal phones in your phone, personal calls on your phone. Not a very good impression. So I myself never answered my phone unless I saw it was like one of the main cheeses at the office, because they know I'm normally with a client and they would only call me if it's an emergency or if it's something very important that needs my immediate attention. And I normally explain it to the customer as such. So other than that, do not be on your phone while you are busy with the customer. It's unprofessional. Don't post on social media when you're at the customer. And if you are going to be posting social media on your personal time, be aware of what you post on social media, because that's obviously available to the public. And if you're going to go and do all kinds of nonsense, let's say you're going out and there's all kinds of pictures of you passing out drunk somewhere, perhaps, yeah, not a very good idea. Because what if one of your clients were to accidentally stumble across your social media page, maybe it's your Facebook page, and now they see you drunk as a skunk, but now you come to their office as a technician? It's not going to make a very good impression. You might be very professional at their premises, but now they saw you on Facebook looking like that, obviously. So always assume someone might accidentally stumble across your Facebook. The same as that ticket. Write the ticket as if someone is going to read it from that company, as if the customer is going to read it. So you want to go and put stuff on your Facebook as if someone might stumble across it, or at the very least, stuff that customers should not see. Don't make that publicly visible, because most of these social media platforms have the ability for you to go and choose who can see what. So maybe only allow your close friends and family to see most of your weird pictures and videos and stuff, and the general public can only see the good stuff. So that might be something to take into consideration. Be respectful of property and confidentiality. Don't use customer equipment or services without their permission. It doesn't matter what it is. If you want to go use the restroom, I know it sounds silly, but normally when I went to a customer site, I would always ask them, may I use the restroom? And if so, where is it? And actually, I had one or two weird customers that actually said, no, you're not allowed to go and use it. But that's very rare, but that's a story for a different day. Don't help yourself to food or drink, and don't snoop. That's just a general rule in life. It's just plain rude. Ask before using the restroom, as I've said. Notify customers if confidential material are in sight so they can deal with them. Now, the funny thing is, especially if it's on a computer, normally we as technicians know how to get a hold of it, and we can very easily get a hold of it, but that's besides the point. It's about the principle. So if you need to go and work on a customer's computer, or you need to go and troubleshoot their computer, and there happens to be something open that's confidential, or if you see something that's somewhat confidential, ask the customer to please save and close their confidential documents, and ask them if it's safe for you to go and work on their PC. May you work on their PC? Do they feel comfortable you working on their PC? Have they closed anything that needs to be closed? So that's just called being professional, obviously. And then lastly, maintain a tidy work environment. So whenever you go and work, sometimes I know it's unavoidable. It's going to get messy, especially if you're going to go and have drilling holes and you're going to have to go and lay cables and all that. It's going to get messy. In that situation, it's fine. But once you are done for the day, make sure you clean it up. It needs to be cleaner than when you got there, if possible. At the very least, leave it the same way you found it, but don't leave it dirty. That's very unprofessional. Be culturally sensitive. Don't make assumptions ever. Treat everybody the same. Doesn't matter if it's an old person, young person, male, female. It does not matter who the person is or what the person is. Absolutely makes no difference. Treat them all exactly the same. And if you find yourself in a situation where language or accents are making things difficult, because that is going to happen, sometimes people have a very strong accent. They can speak English or whatever the language is, and it just makes things a bit awkward, or you just can't really quite understand them. So in such a situation, you might have to go and ask them more than once, possibly use summaries, restatements, and also maybe even make use of visual aids or demonstrations. So if you or the person is struggling to get the message across because they don't understand your language, you might want to go and refer to visual aids or demonstrations. So visually show them on the computer what it is you're trying to explain to them. So as you show them, then they might understand better what it is you're explaining, because, well, they don't understand your language properly. So visual aids might be a good idea to go and think about. Alright guys, I can't believe it has reached that point of the course, but we have actually reached the end of the A plus course. So this was video 19. I know it's module 18, but if you go and count in the introduction video, that's 19 videos. And way in the beginning of this course, if you guys happen to have watched the introduction video, you would have heard me say that I'm going to make 20 videos. So the intro is going to be video 1, the 18 modules in between, and then video 20 will be the exam tips video. It's a dedicated video, which is not the actual course content itself. It's just a bonus video, if you want to go and call it something, where I'm going to give you guys tips on the A plus exams. And as soon as that video comes out, I'm going to start releasing the CompTIA Network Plus videos. So hopefully some of you guys will want to follow me on the Network Plus courses as well, for those of you that's interested. If you feel like this course has helped you, or this video has helped you, please do me a favor and give the video a like. It does drastically boost the video, drastically boosts my channel, and then other people can also find this content. And if you'd like to know when I release that exam tips video or the Network Plus course, remember to subscribe down below the notification bell. And lastly, guys, if you do feel like you want to support the channel, you're always welcome to do so. You can find that in the description down below. I do have a PayPal and a Patreon. At the moment, I only have one tier in the Patreon, but more of them will be coming soon. So the more tiers that I'm going to be adding in the foreseeable future will allow you to have live streaming, where I can do live streaming with some of you guys, depending on what tier you go and choose. And you could possibly have early access to some videos or even see behind the scenes how I do some of this stuff. So it can be even a one-on-one in some cases. We'll see what time actually allows. Right, guys, so thank you for joining me on your A plus journey. If you've been watching all of these modules, well done, because that was a lot. This could easily have been a whole 24 hours, if not more, that you guys have been watching these videos. So very, very well done to you guys. And I wish you guys the best of luck with your 2 A plus exams. And I hope to see you guys again on Preventative Plus videos. All right, guys, have a good one.
If you love me, let me know. If you don't, then let me. Hey.